Today I would like to talk with you about The King of Scars, a fantasy adventure novel written by Lea Bardugo. This book was released in 2019 and it is the first book of the King of Scars duology, as well as the sixth book in the Grishaverse series. As per usual, I will start this video with a short synopsis of the book, then proceed to a non-spoiler review and wrap it all up with the spoilers. If you haven't read The King of Scars yet, do not worry, I'll let you know when the spoilers begin, so you could click off this video. Lastly, if you are here, I have to assume that you are familiar with the Grishaverse, since there's no way to really talk about King of Scars without mentioning the previous books in the series. I need you to keep in mind that this whole video will include spoilers from the Shadow and Bone trilogy, as well from the Six of Crows duology. If you haven't read any of those books yet, and still somehow ended up clicking on this review, then first of all, I have to say that I'm very surprised to see you here, and secondly, you should really not be watching this review, or reading this book for that matter, before reading Shadow and Bone, as well as Six of Crows. Alright, so let's start with a synopsis. The King of Scars takes place after the events of Ruin and Rising, and of course Crooked Kingdom. And just like the Six of Crows duology, it is written in multiple characters' POVs. We have Nikolai, the current king of Ravka, Zoya, the commander of the Second Army, and Nina, a Grisha soldier turned criminal during her adventures with the Crows, then turned to one of the best spies Ravka has. In addition to these three characters, for a few chapters we also get a POV of Isaac, the personal guard in Ravka's king's army. The whole book can quite easily be divided into two separate stories. One of those stories being about Nina and her time in Fjarda, which she spends trying to save as many Grisha as possible from being killed, tortured, or turned into slaves or lab bunnies, while at the same time battling the depression and powerlessness caused by losing Matthias and her own identity as a Corporalki Grisha. And another story being about Nikolai and Zoe and Ravka, multitasking between difficulties of running a war-destroyed and close to bankruptcy country, dealing with religious fanatics, and finding a way to control the monster within Nikolai. Said monster being a lovely present that was given to him in the end of Ruin and Rising by a Grisha known as the Darkling before he was defeated in the battle in the Fold. And if all of this wasn't enough, surges of dark magic starts showing up in various parts of Ravka, completely demolishing everything in its way. I guess it is quite impossible to talk about King of Scars and not try to compare it to the previous books in the Grishaverse, especially since this duology doesn't really stand as its own entity, not the way Six of Crows did. So I will come clear right away. I did enjoy reading this duology. I definitely enjoyed it more than I enjoyed reading Shadow and Bone. This book, while still being an easy fantasy adventure novel, it's not catered so much to the younger side of the young adult audience, as well as it gives us an original story that is not filled with the tropes that are often associated with the genre. This book is also dealing with more mature topics, the characters seem to be smarter, as well as their motivations are clearer than those in Shadow and Bone. And yet, unfortunately, I did not enjoy it nearly as much as I did enjoy Six of Crows duology. And when it comes to King of Scars and Six of Crows, maybe it is a little bit unfair to compare them, as the Crows are in general different from the rest of the Grishaverse books. But Lea Bardugo invited these comparisons when she decided to use Nina as one of the main characters for this book. So to put it shortly, Six of Crows had wonderful characters who had one clear objective: to free Bo Yulbaur and get paid. Or later in Crooked Kingdom, destroy Jan van Eyck and get paid. Yes, lots and lots of interesting adventures happened while the characters tried to achieve their goals, but the main idea of the book was clear and really thought through. And when it comes to King of Scars, the best thing about it is without a doubt its characters. Lea Bardugo is a wonder when it comes to writing interesting multidimensional characters and their interactions with one another. My love for Nikolai, Zoya, and Nina, as well as some other smaller characters, such as Isaac, made this book interesting to read. Now, if I put my love for the characters aside, I have to admit that with King of Scars, sometimes I felt like the author herself wasn't completely sure what exactly was the story she wanted to tell. But at the same time, she still really wanted to continue giving us the front row tickets to the lives of our beloved characters. In addition to that, I think that Leigh Bardugo tried to cover too much at once, which consequently left us with a multitude of plot holes, which only grew worse with the rule of wolves. And the weirdest thing for me about this book was that even though so many things are supposed to be happening with our protagonists, the first half of the book felt awfully slow-paced. Now, I know that I sound quite critical, but like I said in the beginning of the non-spoiler review, I did enjoy this book, and I would absolutely recommend you to read it if you're a fan of the Grishaverse. This book, like all the others, has this certain Leigh Bardugo magic. It still has storylines that surprises you, adventures that entertain you, characters that make you swoon, and backstories that break your heart. And on this note, we will proceed to the spoiler review. So if you have not read the book, then this is your warning to click off the video. As I have mentioned before, in this duology once more we get multiple POVs. And there is nothing more that I enjoy in a fantasy adventure novels than the possibility of being a part of all the action, especially when things are happening simultaneously in different parts of the world, as well as getting to know the characters and their thoughts on the deepest possible level. Anyhow, giving us multiple points of view also means that the book, which was supposed to be concentrated on the life of Nikolai Lantsov, hands down my favorite character from Shadow and Bone trilogy, didn't have nearly enough Nikolai in it for my liking. I would even go as far as to say that Nikolai got overshadowed by the female leads of the book. Despite meeting Nikolai back in the Shadow and Bone trilogy, we did not get to know much about him on a personal scale. He looks picture perfect and he acts so as well. Overall, Nikolai is a wonderful character. There is no arguing that the original trilogy presents him to us as a hero. He's not afraid to sacrifice himself for the good of his country. He saves Alina multiple times. He fought together with common people in the war. He's kind, smart, and brave. He fought to get the crown he didn't want. All he wanted for himself was the freedom of being a pirateer, but he knew that he is the leader Ravka needs, and therefore he claimed this responsibility for himself. And now, this man who was always a hero is forced to become a monster. Now that's a very interesting premise. Do you see how Nikolai manages to battle the dark force within himself? The guilt that comes with knowing that once he turns into the monster, he is unable to control whom he might hurt, as well as the fear of how his people would react if they would know that Nikolai has been tainted by the darkness. And all in all, I think Leigh Bardugo did a pretty good job explaining to us all the things Nikolai is dealing with, yet with the book divided in 3 POVs, we didn't get to fully submerge ourselves in the desperation Nikolai must be feeling. I guess what I'm trying to say is that Nikolai is awesome, and the setup for his story was great as well, and therefore, consequently, even if the story would have only concentrated on him, it would still have worked, and I would have loved to see Nikolai's life explored to the fullest. On a more positive note, the thing that surprised me the most is that while reading this book, I really learned to appreciate Zoya. If anything, I would say that just in a matter of a few chapters, she became my favorite character of the book. She has a very strong, unapologetic personality. And I truly think that if Zoya would have been a character released in a fantasy book 30-40 years ago, she would be dragged by other secondary characters for being a bitch, or would be downgraded to a strong but spiteful character, or even a villain. But in this book, Zoya and her non-compromising attitudes are being celebrated. While she is not perceived as kind or loving, she is respected by her friends for being loyal and brave and for having clear, unselfish goals and motivations. Moreover, when I got a glimpse of her past, I felt for Zoya even more, as I understood her better than I understood any of the other Shadow and Bones characters. Suddenly, her loyalty to Darkling made perfect sense, as well as her changing the sides and starting to work against him. This book did not change the characteristics of Zoya that made her who she is in the Shadow and Bone trilogy. Instead, we just got a better look at what lies behind that mask she presents to the outside world, and that made her a fascinating character to read about. As for Zoya and Nikolai together, before I started reading King of Scars, I already got spoiled that there might be some romantic story concerning these two. And I honestly could not imagine them together. But that was before I actually knew Zoya. In King of Scars, these two just clicked. This partnership they developed by working together, and this friendship that grew because they learned how to support each other while being respectful of each other's boundaries, it was a pleasure to read about. They did not look to each other for comfort. They kept each other marching. That's what Lea Bardugo said about their relationship in this book. And I think that was great. This support and push to keep on moving was exactly what both of them needed at the time. Nikolai needed someone to pull him out of his negative thoughts, and Zoya needed someone who gives her purpose. And lastly, we have Nina. Now, the way Nina's story ended after the events of the Six of Crows duology was brutal. Corporalki powers that made her who she is were lost. Matthias, the man whom she just recently got back from the Hellgate and whom she finally could have had a life with, dead, killed by one of his own, a fellow Driscolla. And in this book we get to see Nina slowly picking up the pieces. Nina has always been powerful and dangerous. I mean, we're talking about a woman who can make your heart stop just by moving her hands. And yet her kindness and cheerful attitude towards life were always the qualities that overshadowed the powerful Grisha side of her. Now Nina is lost, as if part of her goodness has died with Matthias, and the wish for vengeance at any cost took over its place. She's still our Nina, but you can feel that she is hurting and she doesn't know how to deal with this situation, these emotions. She's still fighting for the good cause to free Grisha, but now she's a little bit more cruel and a lot more reckless. While I overall enjoyed her storyline, there was one moment in particular that I found to be incredibly memorable. The moment when Nina realized that she is not actually communicating with Matthias using her Corp Switch powers, but that all these conversations they share are actually a product of her imagination, broke my heart. When I started reading King of Scars, I knew that Matthias is dead. There's no bringing him back, and I was okay with that. But then once the book started, we got a glimpse at him once more. And therefore, Nina's realization for me as the reader felt like I'm saying goodbye to Matthias all over again. Now, as for the ending, my opinion on this might be a little bit controversial, as people seem to be quite in love with the Darkling, but I did not really like the idea of bringing him back to this story. And that's not to say that I did not enjoy Darkling as a morally grey villain. But for me, it felt like Shadow and Bone already wrapped that storyline quite perfectly. I mean, I knew the Darkling will still be partly involved because part of his magic lives on as Nikolai's monster, but Darkling is Alina's villain, not theirs. It's dark against light. That's the whole premise of the first trilogy. If anything, in King of Scars I found it very interesting to read when the author started to develop a better understanding of the saints. In Shadow and Bone we saw Alina being lifted to the position of a saint, at least in the eyes of the general masses, and therefore we could assume that the previous saints are also nothing else but powerful Grisha, whom people seem to idolize or be afraid of. So bringing back the narrative of the saints and making Nikolai and Zoya to join them or battle them would have been something truly interesting to read. Tipping more into something this ancient, something that could remove Nikolai's curse, yet unleash real uncontrollable power to this world would have truly elevated the stakes. And maybe I think that because I loved Eurys. His lesson with Zoya were probably my favorite thing to read in the book. And how much did I love that last battle? Nikolai battling his demon, truly wanting to keep on living, and Zoya having to give the final blow to Eurys, her mentor, who challenged her, who understood her better than anyone else at that point, who taught her to tap into the real powers that she possessed. Now that was perfection. But that's just my opinion. What about yours?